give me that.
And ramen. Ramen.
Oh, they have a Michelin star. Oh yeah. Once you finish the noodles, drink it. Yeah, I went to a good ramen place. It was really good, but then I always order extra noodles. And then, by the time I finish the noodles, the broth is gone. I'm full.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh, I got that.
No,
Or I'm on a television. We haven't figured it out.
I don't need
oh,
all
wait, I try this.
I need
Talking to people.
I care about you. I understand.
I was.
Okay, but
Yeah.
and I mean, it's just good.
I think we're gonna, yeah, it was just like really like there's just like
Guy Michael taught us this way to do it. Point a farther end of it. Drink the coffee through it.
Really?
Seems like he needs the coffee a little bit higher, Will.
Yeah, maybe. Like, oh, hey.
Hey, were you impacted by the flooding though?
We had some flooding in our basement, but the craziest part was dropping my son off at school. Our older son gets picked up by bus, so it was okay. Yeah, it was just from like an hour range. Nowhere to go. So the bus picked up my older son, and then I said, you know what? It's raining so hard. I'm going to drive my younger son over there. And by the time we got out of the car, it's like a less than 5-minute drive. The water was just flowing over the sidewalks around, but in the street, it's like a river. So I parked, and we couldn't cross the street because if we did, we would soaked. So I picked him up while he's holding his umbrella, and I'm sloshing.
I think that's what we're gonna do. I think
This is like
they had like
they had school, and then an hour and a half later, the school system texted all the parents saying, "Hey, if you want to pick up your kids, just do it now." This is the weather. So both of their schools have water. And this is all from all the suburbs are cut off. No, yeah.
It's real.
just like one subway that got real quiet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, this time was
Yeah. Is this one place or is this a dozen places? Yeah.
But no, those are real.
Those are like, wow.
Yeah.
You got a little bit of rain.
And I mean, like, I'll take it back.
It was pretty good. I mean, the last time it was that bad was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome back. Lunch was good. Good to see all of you. We have in our midst the one and only Dr. Angela Gorrell. Dr. Gorrell has spoken worldwide. She has worked with Miroslav Volf, who you've read. She has worked at Madrid at Baylor University. She is an alum of Fuller Theological Seminary, but she has never spoken at a demon of youth family. This is
Doesn't get any better.
You all are in for a treat, and I'm not going to take too much of Dr. Gorrell's time, but I will say this. I'm very particular and ferocious about my students and who I want to introduce you to, and I'm very ferocious about people that I respect and really like. And Angela is someone who, I don't know if you remember this, but you were like my instructor for Moodle when I came to Fuller here. I don't know, was it Moodle back then? I don't even really know. I was just funny. But we've engaged in youth ministry conversations through the Association of Youth Ministry Educators. We did some work together at Yale. Angela has written on really important subjects. I haven't assigned Always On for you, but that's a book that you should get as far as thinking about technology and formation. And then this idea of suffering and joy has been a really, really important part of her life and her latest book. And she's working on some new stuff as well. But I mean, I think that, Angela, what I appreciate about you is you are really, really thoughtful. You also are deeply attuned to what it means to be human. And you also are just a very kind and compassionate person. And I think those combinations to me are always right. Like when that all comes together, like that's living. And so you inspire me in that way. And so I'm just really excited to introduce you to all of you and to all of you, to Angela. And let's give her another round of applause. You. Okay, great.
Thank you for that wildly kind and warm and generous introduction. It's a joy to be with all of you today. It's fun to come back to the place that formed me. I went to here for like 10 years. I got my master's here and my PhD here in practical theology. And so it was I finished up 7 years ago. And so it's really cool to be back and to be hanging out with you all this afternoon. I'm going to share a bit about my work and like sort of position my work within my story and within the work that we were doing at Yale, and then situate what happened there within the larger story of what's happening in the United States and our landscape as it relates to the intersection of spiritual and mental health. And then I'm going to open it up for conversation among you all. As you all share your perspectives, ask questions, feel free, because I do care about who you are and your background, your story, what you do, why you're here. Feel free to like situate your responses, reflections, questions within your work, your place, your context. It matters to me, it matters to God. So thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm actually going to start with prayer. God, thank you so much for each person that's in this room, for all of the reasons that they came into this room, came into this degree program, whether they're first, second, or third years. God, we pray that you would have a word this afternoon for each one of us. You're talking all the time. Your spirit is guiding us all the time, leading us, sharing with us, empowering us, teaching us. And so God, we pray for a word from you this afternoon. From one another, from your spirit, in our questions, in our stories, wherever it may come from, Lord, we pray for it. We are here, we're listening to you. Thanks for the amazing work that you do in the world, even when our wounded eyes can't see it. Thanks for being good to us, God. Thanks for another day to celebrate who you are, to be with one another, and to be in this space learning. What a gift. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
In March of 2016, as Dr. Argue was saying, I was hired at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture to work on Miroslav Volf's research team. As you can imagine, I was finishing up my PhD here at Fuller, and when I got the call and was offered the job, I was overjoyed. My job was going to be to study joy for about 3.5 years on this research team. And so it was like, not only can I pay rent, which is awesome, but, and I have a job post PhD, but I get to work with one of the most incredible scholars in the world, and I get to study joy. And so for the next 8 months, I read everything that I could get my hands on about joy. I did notice a few months into the project in the fall when we started, our job was to create a network of scholars who were thinking about joy through all these different areas of expertise. And so Dr. Argue was one of those people who joined the conversation among the scholars. But when we would invite people to write papers on joy, who were literature professors, psychology professors, I mean, we brought everybody together. Sometimes when we would invite them, they would be like, joy, 2016? I don't know if you remember what was happening then. It's about the same thing that's happening now for 2024, like a lot of division politically, and people were like, this is the most important thing that you can think of studying. And I found myself sort of defending in fall 2016 this work on joy, like, oh yeah, like it is, I think it is important theologically. And so I was excited about it, but then I felt that excitement being tempered by people around me and by the context that we were living in. And then 8 months into the project, 1 week before Christmas, I was hanging out with youth in the basement. I was a volunteer youth leader. I was a youth pastor for 14 years before I got my PhD or finished up my PhD. I was still part-timing it as a PhD student. And so you can take the youth minister like out of youth ministry, but you can't take the youth ministry. Right? So I'm still like hanging out in a basement with youth, and we're playing like Christmas games, and we've gone to a local assisted living facility to do some caroling. And I left my phone in the car, and I went out to the parking lot, and I grabbed my phone off the floorboard of my car, and I saw 7 missed calls from my mom. Nobody wants 7 missed calls from your mama, you know what I mean? And I knew immediately something is very wrong. And she then texted me, I guess thinking, I don't think she was thinking very clearly. She texted me, Dustin, and she told me that my cousin's husband had died by suicide. And this family member, we were very close, like all of us. We were all, like he had a present under my Christmas tree. We were all hanging, it was Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. We were all getting together Friday night at my sister's house. And so this moment, like no moment had ever been like it. I don't know if you've ever known anyone who died by suicide, but it was like this visceral reaction of like, no, and sudden panic. And I dropped my cell phone on the church parking lot and just wailed, like went to my knees, totally gutted, just gutted. And the next week, being somebody who's, I was, ordained, I am ordained in the Mennonite Church USA. And like being someone ordained, you're kind of called upon like, oh, you know about this stuff, like, you know about theology, you know about ministry. And so the first, that week, I was just like the person called upon in my family to be, to orchestrate his funeral. And so like on Friday night, instead of being at my sister's house for Christmas, we're all at his funeral. Devastating, Get back to Yale, and I'm thinking, man, it's my job to study joy. It's my job to teach a class called Life Worth Living to Yale undergraduates. How am I going to do this? How's my family going to recover from this? And then 2 weeks later, my nephew died at 22 of sudden cardiac arrest. Fly to Albuquerque, New Mexico, different state. Other family members sit with my oldest sister, crying around her counter for 3 days. Speak at my nephew's funeral, spoke at Dustin's funeral, get back to Yale on a Sunday night, back to New Haven in Connecticut. Again, same refrain, right? How's our family going to recover from this? It's my job to study joy. I've never felt this kind of grief in my life. And it's a Sunday night, 2 days later, get a message that my dad is in the ER fighting for his life. My dad had been struggling with opioid addiction for a number of years. So there was a couple of times I thought my dad was going to die. So I think I like dissociated in that moment. I was like, my dad's not dying this week. I'm going to go to sleep. And I'm going to go introduce my class tomorrow morning because I was teaching for the first time at Yale the next morning. And go to sleep, and I go teach my class. And I start getting messages like, if you want to see your dad alive, like you need to come. I get on 3 planes and a rental car into the Appalachia deep in where I'm from and in eastern Kentucky. And I get to spend the last 5 hours of my dad's life with him, which I'm very grateful for. It was holy ground. But then I get back and that really is it. That's done. No more people died in those weeks, but I get back to Yale, get back to New Haven. And I think I just lost 3 family members in 4 weeks, spoke at all their funerals. And they were all like pretty tragic in their own ways, like sudden death of a young person and suicide and addiction. It's my job to study joy. And all of a sudden I joined like everybody in fall 2016 that was talking to me. And I'm like, in a world of suffering, joy is shallow. It's trivial. Study joy, I'm like, unthinkable. I thought it was laughable, actually. And for the next year and 5 months after my dad's death, I really struggled to do my job. I was thankfully like the research nerd on the team, like the research methods person who was monitoring a lot of quantitative and qualitative stuff for the team. And so I got to kind of just like get into that stuff, creating surveys, monitoring data. And I was like, I'll just, but my own writing about it, participating in consultations, it just was really difficult for me. And then all of a sudden on a Sunday night at church, I hear that they're looking for volunteers for the prison ministry. And I hear in my spirit, like, you need to say yes to this. You need to become a volunteer chaplain on Wednesday nights. And I'm like, literally like looking up at the ceiling, like, me? I got nothing. I don't even want to talk to you. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I've been crying in couch cushions on Sunday mornings, baking muffins and crying into them, like, not me. But it's that thing that when the Spirit of God speaks to you, like, no, I've got something for you. You can be at the end of yourself. I'm not asking you to go to help people. I'm asking you to go to help yourself. And like, I've got, like, this is where I am. You want to find me? I am here. There was this thing and I was like, oh man, I got to say yes to this. So I become a volunteer chaplain on Wednesday nights at this women's maximum security prison. And I've never been to a prison before I say yes to this. And they do everything they can to intimidate you so that you never want to go to this prison. I don't know if you've ever been trained in prison chaplaincy, but it's a big thing. But even as a volunteer, like, they're just like, if you're held hostage, this is what you should do, that kind of stuff. So it's an intense training. But on Wednesday nights, I start going. And for all 3 of the first Wednesday nights that I go, first of all, too, there were like 3 other people who worked on the team who volunteered from our church. And all 3 of them were like, I got to take off the summer. Can't do it for this summer. That's why we needed somebody else. Thanks for signing up to do it for the whole summer. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, I'm going to be the one person here every Wednesday night for the summer. Welcome to church ministry, right? Yeah. Thanks for all leaving now. So I started going on Wednesday nights. For all 3 of the first Wednesdays, a different woman tells me that she's considering suicide. And I'm very disturbed by this. So I go to one of the corrections officers, one of the COs after the last Wednesday night. And I'm like, hey, yeah, like, this thing's happening. I feel like we need to talk about this. And he's like, did no one tell you? And I said, tell me what? And he's like, building 2 is for the women on suicide watch. This is building 2. You have been assigned to building 2. And I'm like, that would have been helpful to know. Then a few weeks in later, after getting to know these women more, I realized that almost all of them are in prison because they have struggled with addiction. In fact, little interesting fact for you all today, there are more people behind bars for a drug offense in the United States than the entire number of people who were in prison or jail for any crime in 1980. Take the total number of people in prison or jail in 1980, and that number is how many people are sitting in prison for a drug offense. So the building that the Bible study team serves is largely a mental health hospital and a sober house. I remember thinking how significant it was that after everything that had happened to me and to my family, that I was going to be hanging out week in and week out with women who had struggled with the same things that Dustin and my dad had struggled with. And I was like, okay, got you. All right, I see what you're doing here. You got something for me to learn. Okay, I'm. And so these women's addictions issues and their struggles with despair called to me. And all of a sudden I wondered, might the work that we're doing on Joy, might it have something to do with them? With Dustin, with my dad, like, what would Joy say to them, to me, to you? Deaths from both suicide and opioids have been called, I don't know if you're familiar with this, deaths of despair. Despair is an awful teacher. It's an indiscriminate parasite that feeds off of people's pain. And the more that I reflected on what was happening it became extremely important for me to help people understand that addiction and suicide are not moral failures, but instead are demonstrations of pain that have led to despair. So in prison, my family suffering, these women suffering, and my research all collided. And there was this passionate fire set ablaze within me. And you all, I feel like for each one of you, that your best work in the sense of not like what the world necessarily will value, and I hate the phrase the world, by the way, whenever people use it, I'm always like, who do you mean? But you know, those people, but like what sort of culturally gets celebrated, I don't mean that, but I mean, when you find that place where the thing that keeps you awake at night, the thing that keeps people awake at night, and like your passion for theology, for research gets applied there and connected and woven there, like that's where you'll do, I think, the work that brings you the most, like that sets your soul on fire. So I share stories about this time in my life, this prison Bible study, and reflections on joy in my book, The Gravity of Joy, a story of being lost and found. And I knew that opioids and suicide were killing people at alarming rates. And I suddenly wondered how these forms of death might be related. Right? So not just in my own life, not just in these women's lives in prison, but in the sort of fuller picture of what was happening in the United States of America. And so I began doggedly reading about suicide deaths and opioid deaths. And as it turns out, heroin users are 7 times more likely to die than by suicide than others. But there's even more to the story. After doing a considerable amount of research and reflection, including I interviewed others who had had loved ones who died by suicide and addiction for my book. And I also interviewed people who like have been freed from addiction, like certain people's stories are there. You meet these women in my book that I met in this prison, their stories come to life, like obviously all anonymously, you know. I started like really looking at the sources of pain that were feeding into like despair in the United States. And I realized that the main ones were like a history of abuse and neglect that was unhealed, perceived failure, a lack of control, financial stress, and then overwhelming feelings of anxiety, inadequacy, worthlessness, or shame. Like these were sources of pain that were really contributing to this despair. And all of these sources of pain often nurture loneliness in people. Johann Hari has said the opposite of addiction is connection. Hari has argued that addiction is a social disorder. And then I also want to say that, so that's addiction. There's 3 things that come together that make it possible for someone to die or by suicide or attempt suicide. And I'm borrowing from a book called Why People Die by Suicide, a psychiatrist who did a deep dive into it. And the 3 things, it's Thomas Joyner's book. So Joyner, Why People Die by Suicide. But essentially, these are the cliff notes. First, they have this developed ability over time for self-harm, and they have this sort of, what happens is they lose their fear of death. Death becomes less and less horrifying over time because life becomes more and more horrifying. So death begins to look like a relief from life. So that's the first thing, because life has been so brutal. And so you can see why, when you hear that, why someone in the military, someone in prison is going to have an increased risk. Somebody who's been at one point in my Bible study, I asked one night, how many of you, 2 women greeted each other, hugged, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long. And I'm like, how do you all know each other? They're like, we went to the same group home when we were young. So it prompts me, because I know all of them really well at this point, many of them, because they're in prison for many years, a couple of them like the rest of their lives, you know. I'm like, how many of you have spent time in a group home? Almost every hand in the room went up. Or foster care, sorry, group home or foster care. So this history of abuse, neglect, you know, being unwanted, uncared for, time in the military, time in prison, all of this increase, or domestic violence, these sorts of things increase our our ability to hurt ourselves because, like I said, like life is so horrifying that death seems like a relief. The second thing that happens that comes together is that you believe that no one can reach you in your pain. Like you can see me, but you don't really see me. You know what I mean? Like I can't connect. I like can walk in a crowd of people, but I'm lonely in a crowded room. I don't feel like people really are connecting with me and I can't connect with them. So I feel this sense of profound loneliness. And then the third thing that comes together that makes it possible, and this is the final thing, is the sense that my life, one of two, either my life has become a burden on other people, it would actually be better for me not to be here, or my life has lost its sense of meaning. Like, I don't know why I'm here or how to recover from failure. So a lot of times this will happen, the burden or the sense of loss of meaning will happen because of a crisis of some kind, a financial crisis, or you get cheated on, or you do the cheating in a relationship that you care a lot about, you get, you lose a job, you retire. You have some sort of thing that feels like a crisis in your life and you don't really know, you feel, and so these three things come together. Deaths of despair for me begin as illnesses of the soul. And so I don't know if I should have asked you about, can I like?
You can raise my arm.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, but you haven't already, oh, right here. Perfect, thank you.
We were doing self-portraits.
Yeah. Yeah. Very Picasso. So. Unlimited pain, uncultivated belonging, unhinged identity. For me, this is the sort of America's or other places, like the crisis of despair, of depression, is a crisis of these three things. These are illnesses of the soul. And some of the symptoms of an unwell soul are rage, apathy, depression, anxiety, burnout. And what I really want to talk about this afternoon is this, like, that I think a lot of our work in youth ministry and in larger Christian communities, chaplaincy, Christian leadership, like of all kinds, has been focused on mitigating, reducing depression, anxiety, suicide. Like, how do we make it less? Rather than what I think would be important, which is cultivating joy. And if you cultivate joy, what you get is people who have lamented their pain, because lament is a gateway to joy. We're gonna keep going toward that. I'm gonna talk more about that, but what you get, so I want to talk this afternoon with y'all about, like, what does it look like in our communities to address illnesses of the soul through a cultivation of joy. Alexander Schweinmann, the priest, said that the tonality of Christianity is joy. It's how it sounds. And I don't know that when people think about church these days, that's like the first word that comes to their mind, but I'm wondering, like, what does it look like for our Christian communities, for the places that we nurture, for the people that we invest in, for them to say, like, this is a space, this is a community of joy. I also think that we tend to, when young people come to us, when other people come to us and they tell us they have depression or anxiety, because many of us don't have training in psychology or psychiatry, we just immediately want to refer. And even I will say, like, as a professor at Baylor, at Yale, like, oftentimes I'm told, like, my theology students, like, yes, or my pastors, when people come to you, if they have these problems, like, definitely make sure they're seeing a therapist. But I feel like what we've done kind of is, like, almost entirely farm out the work of mental health to mental health workers. and spiritual, I'm seeing, so I want to hear from you. So spiritual health and mental health are deeply integrated with one another. Deeply. And we can and I want to talk more about my friend Lisa Miller's research, but essentially, before I open it up to you all, I just want to, I think you probably are wondering a little bit about like, why is joy a solution? What did you discover about joy, Angela, that like, why is it a solution? And so I have to tell you a story, because I will define joy in a moment, but the moment you define joy, you make it smaller. And so, you know, like similar to suffering, like the moment you try to like explain suffering, you just like, you do it wrong. You don't do it justice. Same thing about joy. Like the moment I define it, it gets a little clinical, but it's also, they're pretty good definitions. Okay, so I'm at church and I don't want to be at church. This is like 3 months before the prison ministry night happened. All right. Like I decide to go to, I go to church and I'm doing what I need to be doing. Like, you know, I need to be there on Sundays. You have a PhD in theology. You need to go to church on Sundays. Like, so I'm there. I don't want to be there, but I'm there. And all of a sudden they pass around this clipboard. And mind you, for like a year and a month, I had done nothing ministry related at all, right? Before, and this, so it's a couple months before the prison night or whatever, but there's a clipboard that goes around and they're like, we need people to pray for other people on Easter. And I'm like, all right, thinking in my soul, okay, what do we do? So during our church services, the prayer team lines up on the wall and anybody can go to them and they'll pray for them for something. And I feel that little nudge in my spirit. I'm like, all right, I can stand on the wall and like pray for somebody who needs me to pray for them on Easter. Maybe they need more people on the prayer team because it's a bigger service because everyone wants to come that day, you know? Okay, so I sign up on the clipboard. And then I get an email a few days before Easter and it's like, so we're gonna show up at 3 o'clock and we're all gonna pray in before the service. And I'm like, the service starts at 5, and what are we doing? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I signed up to pray for 2 hours with people. I'm like, oh no, no. I'm like, oh no, I'm backing out of this. How do I get out of this? I'm like, I'm serious, y'all. Like, this is how I was like in grief. You know, so but then of course I feel like some of my colleagues at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture also go here. One's one of the teaching pastors. So I'm like, okay, they know I signed up to pray. They know I'm like here this week. Like I need to I'm gonna go do it. I dress in all black. I'm all black on Easter. Like I'm making a statement to God and everybody apparently. And I like go in all black and we start praying in the balcony of the church while the band is practicing. And it's so loud, we can't hear each other praying. And I'm happy about it. I'm glad I can't hear anybody. Because here's the thing, when you're in grief, the last thing you need is Job's friends. Like the last thing you need is like people like, let me like talk about why this is happening and like what God can do with it. And you're just like, no, I'm good on that, you know? And so I didn't want somebody to say something that just was gonna make me cringe in this prayer, you know? And when we're in that dark place, like that's sometimes how it is. And then so they of course switch places and we go down into the basement so we can hear each other more clearly. And I'm just like this whole time very nervous. And we start praying and people are praying and I'm present and I'm thinking, I'm not going to say anything, but I will just listen. And then all of a sudden my friend John starts praying and he says, God, your love is relentless. Like relentless. And it just like echoes in my heart. And all I can think is like, yeah, God, your love is relentless. And it was like for the first moment since my dad had died, I sensed God's presence. Like I had been living in the sheer silence for a year and a few months, but just for this one moment, like the Spirit of God broke in. It's like, my love is relentless. And I was like, okay. And looking back in that moment, I'm able to say that the reason why joy is such a needed, profound, important thing in this moment, in this context, in our time, for the communities you serve, is that joy has grit. Joy has grit. And because joy is the very being and presence of God ministering to us, like joy can always, always find us. That is my first definition. Joy is the very being and presence of God ministering to us. And so even in that's why even if you're in the midst of suffering, that joy can find you, that joy can come to you, that you can participate in it, because it's this presence and ministry of God to you. That's one of my favorite definitions. Another is that Willie James Jennings, professor at Yale Divinity School, wrote the Christian Imagination, Commentary on Acts, among other things. He says, joy is a work of resistance against despair. So that's the Habakkuk 3 thing, right? Like it's joy is a work of resistance against despair. Well, why? Why is joy a work of resistance against despair? 2 reasons, 2 other definitions. Next, joy is an illumination. It's the ability to see beyond to something more. So it's this moment when we realize, when we're with other people, we're in nature, when we're in ourselves, and we realize, oh my goodness, there's more than meets the eye than I can actually see, right? There's more going on here. Like there's the connectedness, there's, you know, like there's something here, something more. And then also joy, final definition, is the recognition of and connection we feel, the meaning, truth, beauty, goodness, and others. I'll say that one more time. So it's the recognition of and the connection we feel to meaning, truth, beauty, goodness, and others. And so you can see how if joy is an illumination, this ability to see beyond to something more, it's this work of resistance against despair. And it's this connection, the feeling that follows feeling connected to meaning, truth, beauty, goodness, others, and actually God, like that's all. I feel like meaning is God, beauty is God, goodness is God, but you can see why it works against these illnesses of the soul. Because it's this connection to others. It's this connection to meaning, to truth, to the goodness in you. Like this is your identity. Beyond whatever you can contribute to the world or do, it's about helping people to know like you are good. Genesis 1. Like, you know, it's like God's sermon got too long and we forgot that part. Like God made you good. You know what I mean? So, and then this unlimited pain. Okay, I've said a lot. I would love to hear your initial thoughts. What stands out to you? What resonates with you? What are you thinking when you think about joy? Yes.
So, curious if you could speak a little bit to this idea of like, and you didn't say this, I'm saying this, so I could be, but joy as almost like as a prescription for mental health challenges. I mean, and I'm making some like jumps there because I think there's some, it's really popular right now that to see depression and if somebody committed suicide, then they obviously had mental health issues, sickness, or something like that. And maybe there's probably a better way to put that or a better way to phrase that, but do you see joy as almost a prescription or to help with underlying causes of what we might be calling mental health struggles?
So what I'm saying is a few things. One, that I do think that mental health workers and spiritual guides like need to work together. And when I say spiritual guides, I mean spiritual directors, chaplains, pastors, youth leaders, camp directors, whatever, you know. And so they need, first of all, they need to work together. Secondly, I think Thomas Joyner's book's title is really helpful for all of us. And like, so just since we're in a class together, you know, talking about people dying by suicide rather than committing suicide is a really powerful change in language that can help to create compassion for people. Like when we say commit, generally we mean like people commit murder. They commit adultery. So like the moment you use that kind of language, it becomes like this person did something very wrong.
Right.
Whereas instead of like this person died by suicide, perhaps like create some space for like, what was going on there? Why did this happen? You know? And so what I'm saying is that yes, like people who die by suicide, I do think have some mental health issues that are going on in the sense that they might be depressed about the fact that they're lonely. They might have anxiety about the fact that their life has lost a sense of meaning and purpose. They might have rage, apathy, despair about the abuse and neglect or PTSD that they carry or whatever else, you know what I mean? What I'm saying is that mental health is just one problem. It is more of a symptom of these deeper sense of things that also need to be addressed. So while psychologists can help people and need to, like sometimes people need medicine to get them through a period of time. Sometimes they really do, like people are born with certain brains that have lower levels of serotonin and dopamine and so on, and they really do need medicine. Some people need EMDR therapy. I needed it. After my 4 weeks of family members dying, I did EMDR therapy for 6 months that helped me to relive those moments in a way that I could like talk to you like I am today about them without breaking down. But that took EMDR therapy. But I'm saying that's one aspect of helping to heal people. But I'm saying that joy and us as spiritual guides in the cultivation, when we're cultivating joy, we're cultivating a connection to meaning, truth, beauty, goodness, one another, God, right? So we're working to cultivate that in people's lives. And so that I'm saying can help to heal these illnesses of the soul along with mental health care. And also it can be a preventative measure. Like for me, I don't want to always respond to crisis. I don't want us always as spiritual guides to be like, it shouldn't take someone getting to depression, despair before we respond. It's like, what would it look like if we're cultivating communities of joy, of meaning and goodness and beauty and truth, you know, with one another? Maybe we're preventing. So prescription, I don't know that I would use that language.
Me neither. Thank you.
I think I would use it more. I would think more of like, it is our calling, like the sacred call in our life to help people to, you know, experience joy. Because for me, joy is also like, if anybody, like you said to me, like, what's your favorite scripture in all of the Bible about joy? I would say Luke 15. And it's like this, just this beautiful ode to joy, right? You have a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. And like what is lost is found, and there is great joy. You know, and so it's very tied to resurrection, to restoration for me as well. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, other reflections, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Then I'll go.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I have a question from this angle. We had a college student 2 years ago who drank a little too much at college, and he took his own life with a gun. We just baptized him 3 years ago, so it hurt the congregation really deep. How do you speak a little bit into how do you invite the grieving of a suicide into joy?
Yeah. So the thing that I think is so powerful about joy is that there's all different sorts of kinds of joy. There's gathering joy, healing joy, sobering joy, quiet joy, you know. And so when it comes to, so first I'll start by saying that I do think that lament, and there are several gateways to joy, and I'd love, you know, later on as this conversation unfolds, I'll share with you some of the gateways to joy, but one is lament. And so this could work for a number of kinds of laments that people have, but specifically for a suicide, I think this can be really helpful. And I'm drawing obviously on the Psalms themselves, but specific also from a book called From Lament to Advocacy that's edited by Ann Streety Wemberly. So there's 3 parts to lament. The first is naming. And I've done this in a room with 200 people. You can do it where everybody does it silently to themselves, or you can do it like in a room. So for example, I literally had a microphone and like gave everybody an opportunity first to just do the naming. So I would say like, this young person has died by suicide. Like I invite all of you to name everything that is coming up for you as you think about this death. Like, what are you angry about? What are you sad about? Like, what are you like confused about? Like, what are you feeling hopeless? What are your feelings that are coming up for you? Like name your laments. All right. And so they name it all down. Like you give everybody 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, to name those. And then And so I took around the microphone and I'm like, let's name. And people just took the microphone and they would just read a sentence that they'd written down, read a sentence they'd written down, read a phrase. And like, you're hearing all these people naming their laments together around this thing. The second is questioning. And I told people, like, write down every question you can think of for God, for this person, this young person, for the context that they lived in, like this college, like why couldn't you help them? Where were your friends? What was going on here? Like, what questions do you have? Write them down. And then go again around, 5 minutes or so, go around the room, have people name their questions. And then I also usually create space for like silence, for like the questions that haven't been asked, for the laments that haven't been named, And then the third part and the final part of lament is imagining. And there's a couple ways of imagining. Like, if God were to break in to this situation, what might God do? Or the other part, sometimes we can't go there, but maybe the other part is like, who have you known God to be? This is Psalm 77, right? Where Psalm 77 at the beginning, like saying, it's a series. If you're having a really bad day, Psalm 77 is a great one to start with, okay? Like, he's just like naming his laments. And then there's this turn in the psalm where he says like, but I remember. Yeah. And so this is an opportunity for all of us to say, like, what do you remember? What has God done? Who has God been? Who do you know God to be? And what has God done in this person's life that you want to be expressing maybe some gratitude for today? Like, what do you remember about this person beyond the way that they died? And then, so this becomes, and I think what happens, and then you share those, is that the joy and sorrow is able to reside in close proximity to one another. And we realize suddenly in a lament like this, I don't betray my grief by allowing joy in. Like, I can both like be really sad that this happened, be really confused, have difficult questions, and I can also say that I know these things to be true. There is goodness left in the world. There are things that have been beautiful that have happened. And I can recall them to mind, and sometimes they can carry me, like keep me going. And I think that's the other thing that I would say is, like, when it comes to lamenting a suicide, so you create that practice, you do that thing, you try your best, I think, to honor that person's life beyond their death. Like, who were they beyond the way that they died? And for me, it was very helpful in Dustin's funeral for us to talk about the freedom that he must have felt like after death, and the freedom that he knows that we don't know yet, but also just allowing it to be shrouded in mystery is good too, to say like, this is hard and I don't know why this happened, I think that's okay too, to be like, yeah. Chris, yes.
Two things. I think first, I'm reminded again, I can't remember who said it a while ago, but like, grief just like comes up over and over. Like, once you think you've grieved all the way, like, you just grieve. There's like things that come up randomly that happen. And so like, I resonate with your story today. My uncle died of opioid overdose in 2016 as well. And so like, your language around these sorts of things are like demonstrations of despair rather than moral failure, I think is, I'd never heard that before in that language. So that's just helping me grieve in some ways today and bringing, so I want to say that first. Kind of tied to that, I remember going to his funeral, and so I'm trying to think practically about this because not everyone is in on a funeral preparation process. I watched through that time this sense of like, we don't want to grieve this person, we want to like celebrate, in words like my grandma saying like, yeah, we're not going to cry here, like, we're just going to celebrate him. And yet I was vitally aware, I was like, that's not the place that many people that are in this space coming. And so I think from a pastoral position, I'm wondering, like, how do we help people who, because I know my grandma, and that's like not, I think she does a lot more grieving and lamenting than she wants people to believe, sort of a generational thing there. Like how do we help people know that other people are sitting in grief differently than them when it comes to that process? Or do we do that? Is that our space to do that? Or because I understand all this and I want people to get to joy, but I don't want them to like prematurely just like not grieve in order to get to joy as well, because I don't know if that's a false sense of joy or what.
Well, that's the
So,
thing, like
yeah.
joy is not naive. So joy doesn't neglect the truth, right?
Right.
That's what I'm saying. It's a recognition of the truth. And sometimes the truth is wildly painful.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that like, but so the joy has, but it's like, there's still there's truth to be found there. And there's a deeper, so it's this, that's why it's this profound, it's very different from happiness from a theological standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, happiness is looking at your life. So happiness, for example, like just a little etymological thought here. Happiness became a really popular word in the 1800s. This comes from a book called The Story of Joy. But in the 1800s, it became a really popular word in the English language. And it was used to describe a calculus of material conditions. So happiness generally was spoken, and it was usually used as like a public sort of calculus of material conditions. And so when we say happy, for many of us, what we mean is I am happy with the situation of my life, with my circumstances, with how much I have. Or Miroslav would say too, like it's gotten over time, like really acquainted with like pleasure. Like I feel happy on the beach sitting here. I feel happy while I'm eating this ice cream. I feel, you know, and I think happiness is great, like perfect. You feel happy with your circumstances. You feel happy with how much money you have. You feel happy with your ice cream. Wonderful, you know. But joy is this deeper, more profound emotion that's about the things that like make us want to get out of bed in the morning. So Miroslav would say joy is pleasure plus meaning in a really succinct way. You know, I think it's, you know, like, and so I think it's textured in that way. I was saying like it's this ability to have an illumination and these sorts of things. And so I hear in your question sort of like, I don't want them to rush to joy. And I'm like, but to get to joy is to, like, it doesn't mean that you're neglecting your grief. It doesn't mean you're neglecting pain. Joy says, I recognize that there's pain and sorrow here, and yet, and also, like, there still is goodness to be found, truth to be sought after, like connection here, meaning in our lives. You know, and so that's why I think it's such a powerful idea in the midst of a funeral, especially, and why it's this form of resistance in our lives or whatever, you know, and why. And so in calls in the Bible, throughout the Bible, almost every like biblical call to rejoice is y'all. Just like Jeremiah is like, for I know the plans I have for y'all, but we like put you instead on pillows. It needs to be like y'all. And the plan is a bad plan, by the way. But the plan is to be in exile and to struggle. But so whenever I see that on a pillow, I'm always like, that's so funny. But so biblical calls to rejoice are the same way. Like they're gathering calls, like y'all rejoice. Y'all have joy. You all find something to that is good, beautiful, meaningful, truthful in the world and rejoice over it. And so that's when also I will say that joy is distinct in that so there's like the action of rejoicing. There is joy as a feeling, which is what follows that connection and recognition of those things I was talking about. And then there's joy, joyfulness, like a characteristic of joyfulness. It's a spiritual gift that some people have. Like most theologians don't have it, but many other types of people have joyfulness, you know, as their character. Like there's some people that just kind of walk around and that's like how their brain was made. It's how they were wired, it's the gift that God gave them. And then there's joy, and the kind of joy that I'm talking about today is both, I'm focusing mostly on the feeling that follows that recognition that we can't make, but we can live open to. And then joy as a virtue, as a work, joy as an end. So as like something that we posture our lives toward, you know. And so I want to say I lament with you that your uncle passed away in 2016 in the ways that he did. And I absolutely understand why you would want to weep at his funeral and say, that's a hard way to die.
Yeah.
And I hate that he lived, like, you know, like I resonate, like, I don't want my dad to die of addiction. Like, I would rather him die 1,000 other kinds of deaths, you know? And so it's okay to weep at like what happened and to say, you know, and at the same time to try to remain open to these other things, you know? And then when it comes to funeral planning and other people, obviously, if your grandmother is the one orchestrating the funeral, it's going to be much harder for you to say to her, there are other people who might feel differently.
Yeah.
But I think when you're helping people to orchestrate a funeral, a question like, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on like how you want this to go and what would feel like what I hear in you, you know, what's your grandma's name?
Donna.
Donna, like what I'm hearing in you is that for you, this needs to be a time of celebration because of A, B, and C. Others of you in the room, like, what do you need for this to feel like a meaningful day for you? And if you just ask that question and then like, you know, Morgan, what do you need? Like, Dane, what do you need? Sometimes then other people answer the question. You don't have to tell Donna.
Yeah.
Other people are like, Donna, other people need something, you know what I mean? And then you can be like, okay, is there a way? Is there but then it becomes like, is there a way to honor the different kinds of grieving that we want to do this week and the different kinds of celebrating? Because y'all, funerals are for the living. They're not for the dead.
For sure.
If you ever wonder if you should go to a funeral, if the living people were that you love were impacted, the answer is yes. Funerals are for the living. They honor the dead, but they're really, you know, other reflections, like thoughts, challenges. Yes.
I have a short anecdote. Thank you, Angela, by the way. Short anecdote, and then there's a question that comes from it. A friend of mine, just in her 50s, early 50s, the first death she ever experienced was death of her mother by cancer. And she really naturally struggled with that. And in our tradition, we use Schmeman's words of the liturgy as joy. That's what we've all grown up as, singing and everything. And she said, well, I grew up hearing that, but I attended, but I didn't really feel or experience the joy. But then she said, after Mum passed away, the only place I could process my grief was during the liturgy. We have a part in the 3-hour service where we pray for the dead, and you could send up the names of the persons passed away, and we ask for their rest, for their repose. And so, yeah, she said the only place she could really process her grief was in the liturgy. And then she said, and that's where I started to feel joy. So my question is, can someone truly feel joy without going through some form of grief or some form of sorrow, especially if we, like, think in Prodigal Son in week 15.
Yeah.
There was the sorrow that, like, I'm imagining as he comes home to his dad. The story says his dad ran to him.
Yeah.
So that's joyful. It's like, oh, that's coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm imagining there's also the sorrow of he's much better than I thought he was. Ouch.
Yeah.
So there's like that, what sometimes people call bright sadness. That,
yeah.
So do you think someone could experience joy truly without going through some form of grief or sorrow?
Yeah. So Shreyan, yeah, he's the one who says in his journals that joy is a bright sorrow. So he would say no, probably, because he would say that no matter every time we have joy, that we are choosing to allow for a moment for the pain of the world, the sadness to hang in the background. Like we always, like, even as we give ourselves over to joy, like we just allow the sadness and sorrow to hang in the background for a moment, but we kind of always know it's there. But I think I would have to disagree with Shreman to say that it's always like that. And that's like, I would say that joy is, I would say it this way, joy is not dependent on sorrow, but it can accompany sorrow. Like, and it does often if we allow it to. So the reason why I would say that is because there have been plenty of moments where there's not, I think that you can quickly go to sorrow. I think Brene Brown says this is why joy is the scariest emotion, is because the moment we like give ourselves over to it, we're afraid we're gonna lose it. Yeah. And so you can quickly go to sadness or sorrow because you're like, oh, I don't want this, I want it to last. But if pleasure is my nephew Ro, who's adorable, he's 6, and he's just like, I have lots of nieces and nephews, but like me and Ro are like, you know, and if joy, I mean, pleasure is Ro eating ice cream, in Redondo Beach, which is where I live, like hanging out with me, then joy is me watching him eat ice cream. And it's because of that relationship that we have, because of all these moments that we've shared, where I just like delight over this little human that's brought so much meaning and goodness into my life and brings it into the world, like as he is who he is. So I don't think that that's really deeply attached to sorrow. I think that there's just this beautiful joy. And I think that happens in nature sometimes, where we're not necessarily sad or sorrowful, but like we feel this, I don't know if you've ever like looked at a super moon or like surfed the perfect wave or gotten to the top of a mountain or whatever in nature, like seeing grass growing through the sidewalk in the right way. And you're like, man, like, no, where you just have like this Zen moment and you're like, okay, like the world's like, it's really beautiful and it's really good. And there's like something more going on here. What's going on over there?
Right.
I didn't hear it. What?
Oh, they're talking about. Oh, I just said 18th hole in Pilgrim
Yeah.
Beach.
That might be happiness.
That is deep joy.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Sure. I had a question about, you mentioned mental health workers and spiritual guides needing to work together.
Yeah.
And I do.
What are we gonna do about that?
You're right. Yeah. I do ministry in the Pacific Northwest, where it feels like that bridge between the two is almost like a non-starter. And the elephant in the room is that the Judeo-Christian narrative is we're like seen as arbiters of hate rather than arbiters of joy. And so there's not space to even enter into a conversation of the work we do benefiting the work they're doing. And so I'm curious, do you have in your research, is there anything empirical or any keys?
I'm going to it right now.
Look at that.
Okay.
Start to unlock those
Yeah, so Dr. Lisa Miller, I think, has done incredible work in this area. I commend to you her book, The Awakened Brain.
Okay.
And for me, I feel like you could literally invite together spiritual guides of different kinds, chaplains, pastors, et cetera, right in your community, and mental health professionals of different kinds. And you could do like a book club lunch for a few weeks on the awakened brain, and something beautiful would emerge. Because, so Dr. Miller, what's interesting for psychologists and people like, is that she's a researcher who's a social psychologist herself, and she's not a religious person. So she's not super open. I mean, she would say she's a spiritual person, but she doesn't like, she's ethnically Jewish, and so what's good about her work is that I'm going to tell like why it's so good for us, but what it like, psychologists like it because they're like, oh yeah, good, she's not a religious person, like great, she's not a Christian, But Dr. Miller and I have been working together over the last few years doing consulting for the U.S. Army. So we were like the two civilians on a team. I've been working. We did a 2.5-year tour of the United States, going to different Army posts across the nation, trying in an effort to reduce suicide rates in the U.S. Army. And so we were working closely together, and that's how I got to really. And what basically she was the empirical scientist that I was looking for. So she's a clinical psychologist and scientist who studies the relationship between psychology and spirituality. And her research demonstrates the connection between depression and a lack of attunement to what she calls the spiritual self. So a lack of spiritual attunement is deeply connected to depression. She has been able to show through brain mapping that everyone has a spiritual center in their brain, so that the spiritual self is 1/3 innate and 2/3 nurtured. Your brain, she would say, is mobilized for spirituality. Like there is a spiritual center in your, okay. Her research has proven empirically that when the spiritual core is strengthened, people have less severe depressive episodes, and their episodes are shorter, and they are also less suicidal. So the more spiritually attuned they are, the less severe their episodes are, the shorter they are, and the less suicidal they are. Okay, so she and her team have found that spiritual experiences change the physicality of our brains in healthy ways. So in one of their studies, Miller and her team recorded the brain activity of young adults as they first told a story about a stressful event, and then one about a spiritual experience. Stress, when they were talking about the stressful event, the brain's frontal lobe would light up. And this is the part that's responsible for motivation, reward, decision-making. Miller noticed that all of the stories involved working very hard to get what you want and to get control over a certain, like an uncertain situation. Stress activates what she calls the achieving mind. It's this mode of awareness that's focused on organizing and controlling our lives. The achieving mind asks, how can I get and keep the things that I want? But in contrast, when people told a spiritual experience, it activated different parts of their brain. The part associated with love, and another section where we feel feelings of belonging and unity, as well as the part of the brain where we see the world as active and speaking to us. So she calls this the awakened brain, the spiritually attuned brain, which enables us to see the world reaching back to us. When we live with spiritual awareness, she says we walk through life differently and we see meaning where we otherwise wouldn't. We see things as connected to one another, and we perceive that we are being guided in life. We're not alone. We're being guided, we're being led. And she would say that the more that you can sense that the world is speaking back to you, it's imbued with meaning, I'm connected to everything, the more that you can sense that you're being led, being guided, the more spiritually attuned you are, and the more that that's a protective factor against depression in your life. There's some other really cool experiments that she does in this book. I mean, honestly, I was like, because it's like one of those things where as spiritual people, as Christians, we're all like, yeah, of course that happens. But it's really cool when you can actually, when you hear about the brain mapping and stuff. For example, she puts people in 2 different rooms and she has somebody and she puts caps on them and she's doing the brain mapping and she tells them to do certain activities. And then she goes to the other room and tells the person to pray for the person in the other room. And parts of their brain light up related to love, feeling connected to other, like as they're praying, like certain, I mean, just really wild, like showing the connection between people and love, you know. And so there's this beautiful, so I think you can imagine how a book like this over a number of weeks might have spiritual guides of different kinds and mental health workers of different kinds coming together going, how could we work more together? What would that look like? Yeah, let's take a break. I know you've been like sitting here for an hour in a few minutes. So let's take a 5-minute break. Come back at 2:46.
Lisa Miller, man.
Wow.
What do we got? Oh, it's this huge divide, man.
Even if there's traffic.
Distrust.
I mean, at least in my context, I mean, it's changed.
So once we finish here,
Mental health. There's starting to be more health issues. But at least for the older ones, either safely. Yeah, it's like it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, if we stand up
Or
for the
they
second round.
view it as a moral stop. It's not working.
No, it's staff.
What it's testing on.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so in terms of
Slow work. Yeah. It's like you have 3.
Sure.
Yeah, access this with, there's like, this is like, we're in this bigot.
Oh, yeah. So that's interesting. So,
Yeah.
so March is on staff. Just
Yeah.
compared to.
Yeah.
Or at least like most of them. And then within that. Yeah, you can. First couple. I'll say that my first year on staff.
Hey, maybe. The notes,
Immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Compared to.
No, not all of it, I mean, like a good bit of it for my butt.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So if you
definitely-
can talk to the fair assessment of how
Yeah,
to
yeah.
spot right tomorrow, like. sort of
He's,
like-
he's also, yeah.
Yeah.
Answers.
Cannot recognize.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
On the surface.
Yeah, that's the way.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I like-
That's so good. Actually,
Thanks for
I
sharing.
I like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow it was the best.
Oh,
We-
man.
There are times,
Right, I think that the liturgical scholar
those are
who
okay.
hired for
Yeah.
this,
and then
so what I.
actually, when you're playing this song, you start talking.
Yeah.
We would literally have scholars of all
My
these.
first match, I played against this.
Come in and write
Trying to
a
find
paper
out.
about joy
Oh, but
and
you-
then present each other, debate everything. And we got
You can
to
say
really
anything.
have
but-
discussions. Well, then when I was writing my book, I was
Yeah,
like,
we're
I
doing
went back to.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
And I think one of the scholars
And then
had
I just kind of.
worked on Fremont, which made me like,
And in
you know,
those
go to
moments,
his journal
sometimes I
and
felt
read
like.
more, and then I read also for the one.
Oh, yeah. Right?
That's awesome. Because he has.
It really depends.
Joy.
I
So that's where I
you know,
was
people,
like,
you know, oh, yeah, East Coast, liberal, not really.
so we can.
Yeah,
review.
Yeah.
I love it, and it's quite a lovely thing. What you did
Yeah.
is like, why does,
Yeah.
why do we have to do
You're
things?
bad.
Because they're not necessary. We had a friend who might turn on the hand.
There you
It's
go.
not necessary complication.
Yeah, those master
Beauty is like,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
joyful.
Oh, yeah.
Right on time.
Right on time.
I love doing podcasts. So it's finding joy with friends.
My body knew.
Solve a lot. The question I was gonna ask is,
Yeah, where are you?
funerals are like,
What I need is the one.
Joyce always says it's really strong.
Charlotte.
I mean,
But that,
Yeah. I'm with you.
I really enjoy voices like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean
Well,
like grief, it's
I like
just-
needed something
It's
to
all about-
focus, and
Yeah.
I was like, just drink some water.
Yeah, they're not water, it's like I have two stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like you're going.
And then
to
that's
dinner
something
with
I
like,
like.
Oh, yeah.
they probably
Yeah.
get it. But my book is.
I,
Please don't let me go to sleep, son.
I just bought it.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was my crazy. No, it's only like 3 hours.
Good morning, Becca. Here you go. I did. She looks a little sleepy. Zoning out.
thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I think I'm on the same, yeah, Hardy, right? Yeah, I'm in. So is the like cookies in the middle,
Yeah.
or like in
There's a
the
little,
caramel,
like,
graham
graham
sandwich thing?
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like we have got to that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
But it is delicious. Like in America.
It's BIANCA.
Oh, I don't know what, look at my first, I give me your hours.
Oh,
I like
it's
thought it was
okay.
the, you know, I'm like real cool. I thought I was on the numbers.
You're
And I
okay.
was like,
Either way.
yeah, all right.
Okay,
So
okay,
that
now
was
I-
like a chocolate.
Oh, 404,
Okay.
825.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Five.
yeah. No, you're the only girl.
You're
that
like,
I know.
Howard, yeah.
I remember because like Bianca Howard was
How
that
did you
her?
know?
Yes, yes, yeah, that's how, exactly, which is fine, yeah.
I thought that was fun.
I know, but my maiden name is Robinson, so you might see that on some things.
Yeah, I mean,
I still, that's my
It's like a-
middle name.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Oh, hi.
Yes.
Can you send me your email? It's like a
Word
hard
copy.
copy.
Always don't tell me that ever again.
Did you
I
send me
thought-
my phone number?
I thought that too when I looked at the
I went,
picture again.
yeah.
I never
was like,
saw it come through.
I thought this
Well, they have different.
really might be.
Bianca Foley, yep, that's it. So send me a message. Yeah, you send me a message now, and I'll get your number.
That, like, I'm working
So this says, put Mavis, and I got you, just put Mavis. And I got
Oh,
you.
yeah, yeah.
And you want my email?
No.
Oh, what did you say? You just wanted.
I send you my number.
Yes, and then send me, yeah, send me. yeah.
My email,
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Did it come
it's
through?
her, like her, yeah, I don't
There,
know.
no.
I think it's a way. That's
Huh.
So like between the first
Okay.
years and the fourth.
And then I
years,
wanted to
it's
pick
not any
you.
different, you know?
Yeah.
It's funny about that because I wasn't gonna say that.
Are you preaching?
Watching the video.
Oh.
There it is. I got you. Okay, 778. Got it. Okay. And then send me your,
I'm not preaching this Sunday either.
Yeah, you.
I had somebody.
Wow.
Yeah, you can. Let me see.
All day.
So go here. It's the best, right?
I was.
It really is.
I go home.
That's
I was-
really cool.
I feel the same.
I was like, that box looks
Go like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
Thank you.
I got them. Thank you, baby.
But
Awesome.
yeah, still, I still.
All right.
I don't.
Yeah. You know, I'm gonna bring this up the other day. What do you think about doing like a
He's
group
one of my
meeting
dearest friends.
or like some kind of group meeting or something with everybody's numbers?
Oh, yeah, I did a lot of.
I'm just trying to figure out a way to keep in touch with everybody.
Or like if, like we've done this, we did this at Westmont, I have like a roster or like a,
Thank you, Laura.
'Cause we don't really have one.
thinking of directory, yes.
We don't really have one.
Contacting individuals.
Which I don't actually think I have.
I didn't know if we were, because the only thing we have is everybody's email.
Was it a paper thing?
It was one paper.
I was looking for it on, like, I was like, I'm sure Chris technically emailed this to us and he did not.
Yeah.
So obviously there is a choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's more.
Okay, I mean, I don't necessarily need it.
So in our 10 years, too,
We
they're
don't,
not-
yeah, right.
they're crazy.
Yeah.
All right, so,
Yeah,
I can't believe that we've got like 40 minutes-ish to talk and finish this up, but, I think that if you're gonna cultivate a community of joy, these are some of the most like important, and I have 1.5 because I meant to put synchronicity up there, but this is like 8 gateways to joy. These are ways to help people to open themselves to meaning, truth, beauty, goodness, others, God. Okay, and so lament was, we already talked about, thank you, Jason, for your question, how to do that, naming, questioning, imagining. Literally, you all, like, I'm telling you, I've done it a couple of times. You could even do it on Sunday mornings regularly. I mean, people like Michael's community, like this, you all got this down, you know how to look, like, do good liturgy and lament, like, you know, but this idea of this corporate lament and having the microphone passed at church, I did it for them, almost a year ago. And I just got an email like a week ago from the pastor, and she was like, people are wanting to do the lament practice again. They felt like it was really, that was a year ago. And it's like stayed with them. And she was like, how did you do it again? I'm like, no, I didn't take some notes, but I sent her to them. So I was like, that'll be $500. No. She didn't listen the first time. Okay, no, 1.5 should be 2, but you know, I forgot. Okay, this is the spiritual attunement. This is one way to help people to be more spiritually attuned, is to help them look for synchronicity. And this might be something that a psychologist could get down with, I don't know, but we'll see. But so what I would do with my youth, when I was a youth pastor at Pasadena Mennonite Church right down the road here, we would have what I called God moments. And I would be like, has anybody had a God moment in the last couple of weeks? We only had youth group every 2 weeks. It was really successful. I promise. More people came because we only did it every 2 weeks. That's another tidbit. Like, also, you're a better youth pastor because you have more time to plan anyways. And it made it, you know, there was, anyways, a lot of people came and it was better. So every 2 weeks on Sunday nights, we would have youth group, and once a month we did God moments. Then we had a God moment in the last month. In other words, has anybody ever had a moment when you felt like God was talking to you, God was leading you, God was guiding you, God was stirring something in you, the Holy Spirit was like, hey, I think you need to do this thing. And what that does is it teaches young people over time, or adults, if you want to work with adults, over time to pay attention, like God is talking. And the first few times we did God moments, it was like, has anybody had a God moment? Anybody had a God moment? Nope. Okay. And it was like really uncomfortable as a youth pastor. So then, of course, I had to recruit youth leaders to be like, have a God moment ready. Talk about God talking to you. But the more we practiced over a number of months, the better, the more they became awake. The world is speaking to me. I am connected. The Spirit is speaking to me, right? And so they started to notice, God, yeah, God invited me to talk to this person. And they started being Pentecostal, even though we're Mennonites, they started like, Pentecostals get this right. Like they know, like the Spirit is talking. Are you listening? And so synchronicity can be a way teaching them, okay, when you're looking for something, like, so where are you being led? Where are you being guided? And is the same thing showing up in different places at different times? Pay attention. God may be inviting you into this, inviting you toward this. So and I invite you to be thinking like, how could I teach spiritual attunement? Like how do I make that a gateway to joy, a gateway to meaning, to truth, to beauty, etc. Right? Council circles is another one. My friend, Nina Lau Branson, she's married to my PhD mentor, Mark Lau Branson. You might know his work. Oh. He's here at Fuller, right? So Nina, she started something called council circles. It's a method of storytelling. And there were these people that were living in like a halfway house. And so they had been in a recovery center for addiction. And then when I get excited, I just walk around and everything. So I'm gonna try to sit down. Okay. But she started, so she found out about these people here in Pasadena who were living in this halfway house where they had left the recovery center, but they were trying to reintegrate into society, learning how to be sober together in community, getting stronger, figuring out the job stuff and all that. And she was like, hey, I'd love to run some council circles with the people in this community, to the director, because she knew them. And they were like, well, they already have to go to AA. And she's like, yeah, but this is different. And so they're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll let you practice, try this out for a month and we'll see how it goes. So she kept going on once a week, and she would sit with them in a circle. And first, every time they gathered, they would dedicate the time to someone or something. And they would do it. You can do it in a lot of ways. She would put a bowl in the middle and have them put a penny in it and just drop it, or you could do a gong or something like that. And there's something about dedicating your time to someone or something that immediately creates that sense of the sacred. We're on holy ground together. We're always on holy ground, but we're realizing that, And so they're sitting together, and then she would have them tell about a time when. So whereas AA is very focused on self-identifying as I am an addicted person of whatever kind, there's different kinds of NA and blah, blah, blah. This was very focused on remembering the good. So tell about a time when you needed help and help arrived. And everybody gets an opportunity to speak that wants to. And then after they speak, she does a witness round. What did you hear? And so people get to say things like, I heard you say, Dr. Argy, I heard you say this, and it really challenged me in this way. Or I heard you say this, Morgan, and so then it made me remember this thing in my life. Or Mavis, I heard you say this, and I was like, oh, wow, it spoke to me. So then what are you doing? You're nurturing connection. You can see how in a council circle, through presence, through storytelling, through listening, through remembering, very simple practice. That's it. Sit down together, dedicate the time, tell a story, listen to one another, talk about what you heard, and that's it. And then the group's done and you leave. But you can see how these practices help to work against those sources of suicide that I was talking about, those unlamented pain, uncultivated belonging, unhinged identity. Oh, I am a part of things. I am the world has, God has been good to me. The world has reached back out to me. You can see people start to open up again. And they remember that their life is not all about addiction. It's not all centered on mental health. It's not all broken. They're not all woundedness. And so many of us as spiritual guides and as mental health workers have been trained. This is drawing on Mary Clark Moschella's work in pastoral theology. She says we've all been trained in crisis care, but we have very little training in how to lead people into joy. Because we don't know how to help people remember the good things that have happened. And our brains are very good at remembering the bad and very bad at remembering the good. And so part of what we do in this storytelling is drawing out your life is not all about those 4 weeks of hell when you lost 3 family members, Angela. There is more to life than those 4 painful weeks. There is more to life than 9 months of deployment. There is more to you than this addiction that you've had. right? And so you're digging for it. So imagine like, what would it look like in worship services with young people, to have them get in council circles and you're teaching active listening, you're helping them to like learning how to communicate and tell stories to one another, being present and remembering the good. 3, gratitude. This is probably a more obvious one out of the list, but this regular practice of gratitude is an absolute gateway to joy. Like, because you're actively looking for good things to rejoice over in your life, and recognizing that the world is a gift, your life is a gift. And so I encourage you, when you're leading Christian communities, to make gratitude a regular practice. And so not just something you do like on the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, you know, but like literally throughout the year. When is our like practice of gratitude? How do we integrate it? And really, so one church does this really well, St. John's Cathedral. It's so fun to be in LA telling these stories, because usually I'm like I was in Bulgaria a few weeks ago, like trying to tell a story, and but this is like down the road, St. John's Cathedral. St. John's, once a month, they say, what are you rejoicing over? What are you thankful for? Come on down. Basically, like the Price is Right. Like, come on down if you have something. Yes, right. To be joyful about something that you're thankful for. And they come down, everybody comes around the entire, you know, everybody calls it something different, but you know, the stage. But you know, we have fancy Christian words for it. But so everybody starts standing around it, and literally the priest is like, what are you thankful for? What are you rejoicing? I just got a job. We rejoice with you. My son just graduated from high school. We rejoice with you. I'm free. I'm 30 days sober. We rejoice with you. We are thankful to God with you. Boom, 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 boom. If you think by the end of 25 people talking, sharing their joy and their gratitude, that not everybody, you're all feeling it. Mm-hmm. Joy is contagious. Mm-hmm. Like, it is infectious. Mm-hmm. And so like I left that service, and I'm just like, so my friend was a priest there, and that's why I went to that service. But I was like, y'all do this once a month? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, that was so beautiful. That was so good. Mm-hmm. Gratitude is a gateway to joy. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness. Many of us, when we've been hurt, or when we've failed massively, made a big mistake, and we don't know how to recover from it, it can paralyze us. I will say that I think that the young people that we serve, care about, love today, for many of them, one of the most powerful practices you will teach them is the practice of forgiveness. And not just like, hey, you know, those little platitudes like forgive people, forgive yourself, but like literally, how do I do it? Will be such a beautiful gift to them, because like I said, the roots of so many people's depression and despair is like, I didn't become who I was meant to be, or I failed in this way, and I don't know how to restore myself. And the good news is like, you're participating in the forgiveness of God. You don't have to do it alone. And so forgiveness, like when we are holding on to woundedness, holding on to like betrayal, disappointment, those become obstacles to joy. They become things that convince us the world isn't good. It is not beautiful. There is no truth to be found. I am not, like, people do me wrong. You know what I mean? And so forgiveness becomes this like dam that like breaks. It's this watershed moment in our lives. Like when I forgive myself, when I forgive someone else, where the joy of God comes rushing back in. And so there's lots of different ways to teach the practice of forgiveness. So, you know, and you probably, I mean, writing a letter to God, writing a letter to yourself, to someone else, and then ripping it up and throwing it into a bonfire, that sort of like very palpable practice of forgiveness. Another thing that I teach people is you can go to a picnic table. Like say you can't talk to somebody because maybe they died, or maybe they're an abusive person, and so you can't have a relationship with this person, and so you can't go talk to them. You can go to a picnic table in a park, and you can close your eyes and imagine that they're sitting with you, and you can tell them what you're mad about, glad about, sad about. Mad about, sad about, glad about, and sorry about. And I have actually led, sometimes I've had one of my young people at Baylor, they were experiencing, they wanted to forgive someone who they couldn't go talk to. And I told them you could go by yourself and you could do this. And I said, or I could guide you in it. You can imagine. And they were like, I'd like you to guide me in it after class one day. So we just sat and we closed the door and we closed our eyes. And I invited this person to imagine that the person had come and sat with us. And I said, what are you mad about? What are you sad about? What are you sorry about? And what are you glad about? And it could be, I'm glad that we're not in a relationship anymore. I'm glad that I had the courage to walk away. I'm glad that I stood up for myself, you know, or it could be, you know, sometimes our unforgiveness or a sadness about someone is wrapped up in like our joy about them. And so it's like, man, I'm glad that we had this. Even though I'm sad about this and mad about this, like I'm glad for this. You know, and it can be all wrapped up together and that could be okay. So teaching, or I invite you to think just like, how might we teach spiritual attunement, synchronicity? How are we already doing it? How do we continue to do it? Forgiveness. Practically speaking, how are we teaching people how to forgive? I love, Miroslav says forgiveness comes in droplets. And I love that image. So maybe giving imagery can be helpful. I tell them sometimes too that forgiveness is like a couple steps forward and then like 3 steps back. It's like, I forgive you, everything's okay. Nope, don't forgive you. That you are no, I can't do it, you know, or even with yourself. It can be like that. The next one is celebrating the truth. And this was something that I learned in the prison Bible study. We broke up into small groups one night and I said, prison takes away a lot. What do you still have? And they came up with a list together. So they let me bring flip chart and paper in that night. It was a very fancy Bible study night. And normally I couldn't bring anything in with me. And so they let me bring in flip chart paper after 8 months of being a volunteer. And we used markers and we got to make a list. And every single group said, we have our words. And we thought together about the power of our words and the power of like how we can speak life or death like into one another and to ourselves. And so we decided that like words were our superpower. And so we were going to like speak like life as much as possible into one another. And so I started writing liturgies. Michael, are you proud of me? Yeah, started writing liturgies. And so we would make this a practice, and this is drawing on Christine Pohl, P-O-H-L. She passed away recently. She has a book called Living into Community, and she talks about several practices, and one of them is truth telling. And she says truth telling is affirming what is good and true in the world. And so we were like, how do we use our words to just tell each other the truth? Because we're constantly hearing things that are lies in our brains. Like, you're never going to recover from this. When you leave prison, you're not going to have anybody and all this stuff. So anyways, the first liturgy I wrote, what we did is put a chair in the center of the circle. And you could do this in youth groups. You could do it in worship services. You could do it in small groups that you lead, recovery groups, whatever. We put a chair in the center of the circle, and everybody had an opportunity to sit in the chair, and everyone had an opportunity to read the words to someone else. And so we would like have someone sit in the chair and we would say, you know, Steve, and then I say, you are a child of God. You are beautiful. You are strong. You are brave. You are smart. God has a purpose for your life. And so they would just speak these words of truth, you know, and so we started doing it regularly, writing these liturgies and then sharing these words over one another. And it was incredible to watch what happened, because so much of our experience of life is people telling us like what we're doing wrong and like, why can't you do better and do this and do that? You know, it's nice every once in a while to just hear like the truth spoken to us and over us. We also had a reintegration ritual that I wrote because I decided, oh, these powerful words. And so whenever anybody was about to leave prison, and they knew that they're going to like, hey, I got court on Monday. They'd be like, hey, Angela, I got court on Monday. I'm going to be out. I'm not going to coming back to Bible study next Wednesday. We would read the reintegration ritual. I would have them sit in the seat and we would say the words like, may Jesus grant you vision to see yourself as a new creation. May Jesus give you strength to take up new habits. May he grant you mercy and surround you with people who believe in you. We pray that we will see you again in this life, but not in this room. Isaiah 43:19-20 says, see, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. But like your words have power. You have this ability. Sometimes we just think like that ministry is like preaching, you know, telling this like long homily or whatever. Like there's these practices and these gateways we can participate in with people that can make up entire services, take up a lot of time. Think about it. You don't even have to plan, y'all. You can, you can just have this, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? You have the practices and you let that be what opens up people. So I encourage you, celebrate the truth. And then the next is retrospective joy. I learned this from a little girl that I call Sophia in my book. And Sophia's dad's funeral was on a Friday night. And on Saturday morning, we were sitting and her together playing. And definitely for a week since her dad had died, she did not want to talk about him. And people were very concerned that she just was dissociating, shutting down, 6 years old. They were very, very, very close. And so I was sort of the ministry person, right? That's trying to sit with this child and be with them in their grief. And even at his funeral, she ran around, she played games. She didn't, I don't think, thought much about it, you know, and didn't talk about it the whole week. Like I said, every time they brought up his name, she was like, she said, everyone keeps looking at me with sad eyes, like, please stop. And so we gave her space. Well, then on Saturday morning, I'm playing with her and she's putting stickers into a book. We're putting stickers in, and all of a sudden she's like, do you want to see a picture of my dad? And my minister's heart like wakes up and I'm like, yes, I do. I want to see one. And she'll like, take me to it. And so we go to her dining room table and she's showing me these pictures of them on this trip. And she's like, you know what? My favoriteest picture of him is in my bedroom. Can I show it to you? And I'm like, yes, let's go. So we go in and it's on her, she's got a closet here. The closet door is open with a mirror, long mirror on it. And the picture's on the mirror. And her dad is standing behind her like this. And she's standing in front of him like this. And while I'm like looking at this picture, absorbed in it, she goes into the closet and she grabs the coat she's wearing in the picture. And she comes and stands in front of me and puts it on. And then she's like, hey, will you put your arms out like my dad is in the picture? And I'm like, yes. So I do it. And then she puts her arms out and she goes, we were just like this. And it was the best day. Wow. And I was like, of course, like this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that. I said, that's so cool. I love these memories. And I'm like, I'm going to go to the bathroom really quickly. I'll be right back. I was excited. And I just like cried my eyes out, but I wanted to mirror, like she wasn't crying, you know, but I realized in reflecting upon that moment later, that was retrospective joy, backward looking joy, that the joy she felt on that day by recalling it to mind. This is similar to council circles, right? By recalling it to mind and being present to it could be felt again and perhaps even more acutely. So what does it look like in our ministries to invite people into regular reflection on like retrospective joy? Like how do we help people to recall joyful moments to mind and meditate on them? And then the last is imagination is a gateway to joy. I'm going to invite all of you all to try this. You want to try it with me? Yeah. All right. So if you're willing, you can either close your eyes or you can soften your gaze and find a place on the floor. But if you feel comfortable, either one is fine. But try to get as comfortable as possible in your skin. Yeah, thank you. Maybe roll your shoulders a couple times. Roll them forward. And I invite you to take the deepest breath that you've taken all day. Try it again. You're going to breathe in through your nostrils and out through your mouth, the deepest breath that maybe you've taken all week. And see if you can get 10% more comfortable. And now I invite you to take 4 breaths in through your nose and 6 breaths out through your mouth a couple of times. So in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Try it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then do it again on your own. Now I invite you to imagine that someone has come into the room and is sitting across from you, who has loved you deeply. Someone who has loved you to life. This could be someone who has passed away or someone who's still living. Maybe it's God. Who has loved you deeply? Perhaps they've loved you to life or back to life when you needed it. Imagine what they look like while they're sitting there. Now I invite you to imagine that they're talking to you now and they're saying words that you really need to hear today. What do you need to hear from this person who has loved you? Now I invite you to thank them for the ways that they have loved you. Thank them for their words. Now you can give them a hug, a kiss if you want to, tell them that you'll see them later. Now you can wiggle your fingers and toes and open your eyes and come gently back into the space that we're in. Our imaginations are quite powerful. When we lead people into guiding meditations, we can help them to enter into spaces of love and comfort. Often in like this meditation, when people do it, I invite you. This comes from, I do my own sort of spin on it, but it's inspired by my friend Patrick Reyes' grandma. He taught it to her, she taught it to him when he was growing up. And so you can read more about it in The Purpose Gap, his book. I invite your reflections now, again, like thoughts, insights, questions related to the gateways of joy, reflections on any of the practices I just talked about.
So I work at camp ministry now and work with I give the corporate college students the camp, and we did gratitude journaling, like the affirmation time, and very similar to the 1.5, I think which this is relating to the suicide thing. I don't have any answers for it. It was just difficult for me as their leader to like hear them. But so I asked them to, it was basically the God moment thing. I asked them to share, we called it testimonies, but it wasn't conversion stories. Tell of a time you felt God, like experienced God. And it could be yesterday, it could be, years ago, I told a story about experiencing God through this elderly woman I did a funeral for that lives across the street from me, who's a total stranger. So I kind of started it. They would share, and I just, it was so interesting to hear the conversation we had with Steve earlier about the differences between our generations and being able to relate to one another because the speed of differences. I couldn't relate to them, but probably 75% of these, and there are 30 college students every Wednesday in a circle sharing these stories of God moments. And 75% of them had in their story a story about attempting suicide. And so I grew up in the Baptist tradition, so we would talk about God saving us in these like conversion moments, right? Like I was saved, I was down the aisle. Their stories of God saving them, a text from a friend that reminded them they shouldn't kill themselves, or a parent knocking on the door.
Yeah.
And so I'm mapping out some of these gateways to joys, but at the same time, sitting with these students and discovering that their generation, that was very normal. They were resonating with one another, and we've all attempted suicide. Whereas, I just didn't have that communal common space when I was their age. And then sitting there and going, how, where do I go from here as their leader? So, I don't know. That's not really a question or anything.
No, it's okay. Reflections are welcome. Yeah.
I don't have the answers. I just was struck by that.
Yeah, it's a very, we've had an increase among 10 to 17-year-olds in suicide, 57% in the last few years. And it's sort of like one of those things that's like just this wild, like we're trying to, a lot of us as scholars who like think about like me who do suicide prevention, it's kind of baffling. And we don't know if it's quite like, obviously like social media has a part in it, the prevalent, like how much we talk about it in the news, like how sort of widely accepted it is to like highlight these stories that make it more of an option maybe, but then access to guns, but like guns are the leading cause of death for for young people in the United States now, #1, and #2 is suicide. And so, I think for me, this communal space that we create where these are the sorts of things, they have so much information out there. Like they really don't need like more information. They need like ways of being in the world at peace with one another, with each other, with God, with themselves. You know, and they need ways to articulate where God is in their pain, where they're going, you know, rather than us just like articulating more of like what they need to believe or something like that. They need a way of life to enter into, I think. And that's why these practices, it's like practicing our way rather than believing our way, which beliefs are embedded in all these practices, but you know, yeah. Other reflections, obviously, if we'd had more time, I wish, you know, we still have several minutes together. I want to hear your reflections, any questions, any thoughts, you know, insights, like, please, like, you know, if we'd had more time, I would have had you like turn to each other, talk a little bit about, and when I do that imagination thing, I do two things. I say, turn to each other, and you can either talk about who came to you, and like what that was like for you, for them to like who they were and what they meant to you, or you can talk about just, you don't have to talk about what they said or who they were, but just what it was like for you. Enter into a space with someone who's loved you. And so that can be a way of like, you know, really cultivating community. So having people turn to each other, and then a larger conversation about belonging, about presence, about love. Yeah. Yes.
Well, firstly, thank you so much. This is so much to reflect on. And I wonder, you mentioned about the thing of unlamented pain, uncultivated belonging, identity. There's so much pain in the world generally, but specifically with young people. And I wonder, you know, when we look at the early church fathers, there's all these spiritual disciplines that modern society has lost. And I wonder whether stuff like this can be created into spiritual disciplines for young people, where in the church we tell them about, you know, your quiet times. It's like the quiet times aren't very quiet these days, you know, and act and this and that, watch a video. I wonder, because it's so powerful, you know, it's so powerful, and it's that whole thing. If we can repeatability is so powerful. And I guess, yeah, whether you were thinking of creating some tools or that people can just use, and you know, because I think it could transform like work amongst young people and save so many lives.
Oh wow, well that's super amazing to imagine. And I would say that I think that many of these are spiritual disciplines in their own way. So practices, disciplines, you know, disciplines, like if you do them regularly over time, you know, and I think for me, when I think about the sort of moment that we're in youth ministry, I think they need like less sort of, you know, let's play this game, let's do this thing, let's whatever, like have this icebreaker, and more of just like, can we come together and like engage in disciplines and practices like this and others that you might create, and that it becomes an experience. Like when I walk in youth group, I know I'm not like, and obviously you can like do a practice and then connect it to a biblical story so that you're increasing biblical or deepening biblical literacy. I'm not saying like neglect the text, you know, but like we don't have to stand up with a music stand and talk for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and then do a game and pizza, like only, like we can literally invite them into this, you know. And I've seen in this prison room, like in this prison Bible study, like these women, we sat, it was blue plastic chairs, very dingy carpet, dead bugs all around the edge of the room because they didn't give two craps about this space, right? Dead bugs, dingy carpet, blue plastic chairs that were too small for all of us as adults. And like joy was present. It was palpable. Stories were told, like lives were changed, like people were prayed over. And you can imagine how like you have a counsel circle, you have an imagination practice, a retrospective joy practice, and then people are moved. And then they began, like one night, we just like, we were doing a sort of counsel circle thing. And I sensed that these women, several of them were like wanting to break the chains, like break a thing, you know? And so then one of the women in the room, who's incredible at like music and leading, she's like, we need to sing Break Every Chain. And so we just like start singing, and we're like singing Break Every Chain. And then like people start praying over like breaking these chains and bondage in people's lives. And it was just like here we are, like in this like just dingy room with nothing. We got no instruments. And then another night, like we started singing This Little Light of Mine. And I realized that trying to like teach them new songs with words and bring in sheets, it was just like a lot. So like, let's just go back to songs that we can repeat easily, you know? So we started singing This Little Light of Mine. Well, then one night, because they're so creative, and I gave, like, one of them really wanted to be a worship director out at a church when she was done, and she could like get everyone going and singing. Anyways, one night we're singing This Little Light of Mine, and one of the women's like makes up her own lines. And so then we start doing it, and every Wednesday night we're like, we just start making up our own lines. So they're like, all up in York CI, which was like correctional institution, York, like all up in York CI, I'm gonna let it shine. Wow. And so we're like screaming, people are jumping on this one night, and then one of the women starts playing the drums in the window sills. They're like, this little, they're just like, you know, everyone's like jumping, dancing. One of the COs comes into the room, and she's like, and I'm like, oh man, is she gonna shut us down because we're so loud and going crazy? And she like starts like singing with us, clapping, and and so they're like singing and clapping together, and it ends. They're all like, oh, you know, they're laughing. And she's like, yeah, I just had to come and like join y'all. It was like, wow. I just was drawn to this space. Wow. So like, I think young people, they need that like release and those. And so like, what does it look like to be less calculated as spiritual guides? Wow. And to really pay attention, like what is happening in this space, in this time, like God is doing something. Like, how do we join that, you know, and letting the spirit break out? That's one of my favorite little hymns too. Spirit break out, you know? Yeah, thank you. I
had a question about, you know, all of these, but what if you're stuck in one of them, or you're stuck, or you're paralyzed? Where does will come into play with receiving joy, or deciding to have joy? Yeah. How do you like, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, when it comes to the will of the person, or just our own will to decide to either be joyous or be stuck, or be wherever.
Remember, like I said, the feeling of joy we can't make. Okay. We can't just decide. When it says choose joy, they're lying to y'all. You know what I mean? You can't just choose to feel joy. You can choose to rejoice. So you can choose to find something good, beautiful, truthful, and rejoice over it. You cannot make yourself feel joy. Like I can't just be like, I want to feel joyful right now. I make myself feel that way. It doesn't, like, joy doesn't work like, it's a gift. In fact, Jürgen Moltmann points this out, the German theologian. He says that the word for joy and the word for grace, kara and charis, like, are very similar. He says joy is a gift. And so what we could do is live like this. And anybody who's feeling resistant to joy, I would say, I get it. And like, all it is living open to it. It is like saying, okay, maybe it will find me. And also sometimes we have to pray to want, right? So sometimes if somebody's saying, you know what, I'm in the dark place. Like if somebody's me, Easter 2017 or 2018, right? If they're me, then I'm saying like, I get it. And I'm good. First of all, I'm going to come to the darkness with you, or at least I'm going to sit outside the door holding vigil. Like I'm not making, you know, and I'm going to live open to joy for you and with you. And when you can come out of the room, like, just know I'm right here. Like I ain't leaving. I'm sitting vigil with you, you know? So it's like, you can't. And so it's like, I'm going to will it with you, but also like, I'm going to pray for you to want it, you know? And so, and I think that it really is, because these are practices, just like the reason why we call them spiritual practices, or, you know, is like you practice the piano, right? At first, when you're doing it, you're not very good at it. So at first, you're going to struggle with the God moments. You're going to struggle with gratitude. You're going to struggle with forgiveness. You're going to struggle maybe to find the truth and celebrate it. Like you're going to struggle maybe with this, like figuring out a time when you experience joy and, you know, recalling it to mind. But over time, the more you practice it, the better I think you get at it, and the more you live open to joy. And the more you look for it, the more you realize it's here, you know? And that's the thing, like we often find what we're looking for. So I think what we're inviting young people to do is to look for, live open to joy. I'll end by saying that the way that the image that I want to leave with you all was when I lived in Waco, Texas, and I was working at Baylor. It was the pandemic. And my book was going to come out during the pandemic, March 2021. And so like 1 year into the pandemic and it's still going on. And I'm thinking like, will my research hold? And so I go outside. I mean, that's like what's going on in my life. And on a particular night, I go outside and I'm going to close this gate that I had in my backyard that was like this pesky gate that never wanted to close properly. And so I go and like slam it. And I'm like, shut, stay shut, you know? And so close the gate. And I think that I see a lightning bug, which is what we called them in Appalachia growing up. You might call them fireflies. I think, did I just see a lightning bug? And I'm like, huh. And I'm like, I'm gonna go sit on my porch. And here I am, you know, 40-year-old Angela, or at the time 38, maybe whatever. I'm like, huh, I'm gonna sit here and wait. And then I'm like, light, light, light. Yes, there are lightning bugs. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I remember when I was young and we used to chase after lightning bugs with my dad. And being the nerd that I am, I sit there and I'm soaking it up, and then I start to wonder, what makes lightning bugs light up? So I'm watching them and I make myself, I'm like, just sit here and enjoy this moment and think about your childhood. And then I go inside and I'm like, what makes lightning bugs light up? And apparently there's a chemical reaction inside their bodies that causes them to glow. Researchers, when they were studying human beings, certain research group, I think it was in Japan, they realized that human beings also light up at certain times, like our brains light up, like Dr. Miller was talking about, but it's invisible to the naked human eye. And so I realized, like, as I'm sitting inside my house, like, this is what it is to live open to joy. It's to sit in the dusk and like wait for light, and to realize that around me are glowing, and I actually am too, you know, and that's, I can live like that. Like that's a posture in life. Well, it's been awesome to hang out with you. If you have questions for me, if you want to talk afterwards, I'll hang around for a little bit, but also you can DM me at Angela Gorrell. Literally, it's just my name, no numbers or anything, because my youth were awesome and realized it was going to be a cool thing many years ago. Signed me up. So like, it's just my name at Angela Gorrell. And with 2 R's and 2 L's. And then also you can email me through my website, angelagorrell.com, if you want to reach out. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Really, thank you. That's really the right word. Thank you for bringing yourself today, your work, bless you in what you're doing, what you continue to do. Inspired us. We're really excited about how you're sharing this with others. So, really, really cool. Can I ask two people briefly?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Receive it.
I thank you for the gift, Angela's time, ministry, for the ways that you're using her, her gifts to bring your kingdom to bear here in so many places. Thank you for the joy in this space, for the loved ones we saw across the table, for the ways that you have filled us and continue to fill us. That's the kindness, the gift, being people who are joy-filled and light up in our own space. Great for our young people, students, people who care about them, and continue to meet them in hard places. Help us to be people who guide them to joy and sit in the kitchen outside. Blessing and mercy, goodness, continue to work and grow for your.
Dear God, we just thank you, God, today. We thank you for the spirit of Angela, and we thank you, God, for the joy that radiates from her, God. And we thank you for the mountains that she, the valleys that she went through and the mountains that she's on. And God, we just pray, God, for her, God, that you will continue to guide her and lead her, and the Holy Spirit will direct her to places that need this. Continue to bring opportunities to her and where people can experience this, God. Lord, we are grateful, God, to you and the movement of the Spirit through her and the incredible ideas and thoughts that have come through her mind, God. We know it's all from you. So thank you. And we give you honor and praise for her and for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Let's take 10. If you want to have a few minutes to chat with Angela, she'll be here. And then we'll wrap things up again. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.